The wind howled across the empty plains like a wounded beast, ripping at the bare branches and driving icy pellets of snow against the cabin's weather-worn logs. The storm wasn't letting up, it had only just begun. Elias Rourke stood inside, the dim glow of his single lantern staring into the fire, listening to the familiar creak of the roof timbers as the gale battered them. This land didn't care if a man froze. It never had. A knock came at the door. Not a polite one, just two sharp, desperate raps that cut through the blizzard's roar. Elias stiffened. He hadn't had visitors in months, maybe longer. Not since. He stopped going into town. Not since people stopped looking him in the eye. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then the knock came again, 3 more, fast and panicked. He moved toward the door, pulling his coat on over his broad shoulders. His scarred hand hovered over the handle. The right side of his face, crisscrossed with burn scars, itched instinctively as his heartbeat quickened. Trouble didn't usually knock. But sometimes it begged out. He opened the door, and there she stood. Woman barely more than a girl, really drenched from head to toe. Her dress was soaked through, clinging to her like paper. Her shawl, if it could be called that, was tattered and so thin it offered no warmth. She was trembling, soaked, and half frozen. Her lips were blue, and her hand shook as she clutched a small cloth-wrapped bundle to her chest. She began, her voice cracking, barely audible over the wind. I can trade. He blinked at her, stunned more by her words than her appearance. I can cook, clean. I don't eat much. Or, her voice dropped, you can have me. Just let me stay the night, please. Her eyes met his, and Elias felt something grip him in the gut. Not pity, not lust, just recognition. The hollow look in her eyes, he'd seen it before. In the mirror. The face of someone who'd already lived through the worst and still expected more pain. You'll freeze out here, he said finally, stepping aside. She hesitated only a moment before stumbling in. He shut the door behind her and bolted it. The wind instantly muffled. In the silence that followed, she just stood there, dripping onto the floorboards, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. He gestured toward the hearth. Sit by the fire. She obeyed without a word, sinking down in front of the flames. Her fingers stretched toward the warmth, shaking violently. Elias stepped into the kitchen area and poured a tin cup of coffee, lukewarm but better than nothing. He handed it to her. She looked up at him as if unsure whether to trust it. Drink it, he said, softer this time. She did, in tiny trembling sips. He stood across from her, not too close. What's your name? She stared into the fire. Does it matter? It does to me. A pause. Clara. Clara, he repeated, the name unfamiliar in his mouth. I'm Elias Rourke. This is my land. She nodded, gripping the cup tighter. I won't cause trouble. Just a night. Maybe 2. You can take what you want. I don't care. Elias frowned. He could hear the emptiness behind her words, like she'd said them before. Maybe many times. I'm not that kind of man, he said plainly. She looked at him then, truly looked for the first time, noticing the scars across the right side of his face and down his neck. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. That surprised him. He went to the small linen cupboard and pulled out a quilt. Without a word, he handed it to her. She accepted it slowly, uncertain. You can stay in the loft. There's a cot. You don't owe me anything. Her lips parted. But why? Elias shrugged. Because you knocked. She stared at him, eyes wide, until they glistened. But she didn't cry. Instead, she curled up in front of the fire, quilt wrapped tightly around her. Elias watched her for a moment longer, then moved toward the back of the cabin, giving her space. Outside, the wind screamed against the walls. Inside, 2 strangers sat in silence, one scarred by fire, the other by life sharing nothing but warmth and a fragile, Wordless beginning neither had dared to hope for. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of boots pacing slow, steady across wooden floorboards. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the warmth of the quilt, the low crackle of the fire, and the ache in her bones brought everything back. The storm, the knock, the man with the scarred face who hadn't touched her, hadn't taken anything, who had just let her in. She sat up, blinking into the gray light filtering through the frost-covered window panes. The world beyond was snow-wrapped and silent. Elias stood near the stove, pouring himself a mug. He didn't look at her right away. He simply nodded toward the pot. "There's more if you want some." She hesitated. I didn't mean to fall asleep down here." "You needed the warmth." He turned, leaning one hip against the counter. "You sleep okay?" Clara blinked, caught off guard by the question. No man had asked her that in years, not unless it was for his own reasons. "Better than I have in a long time," she admitted softly. He nodded, sipping his coffee. "You said you'd trade something for shelter." Her stomach tensed. Here it comes, she thought. The cost. It always came eventually. Elias set his cup down. "I don't want anything from you, Clara. Not like that." She stared at him. "Then, why did you let me stay?" "Because you needed help." "That's reason enough." She swallowed hard. It didn't make sense. People didn't give things without taking something back. Not where she'd come from. Not after what she'd been through. Maybe he was playing some long game, pretending to be kind until she let her guard down. Or maybe he was just lonely. Either way, she didn't trust it. Still, her pride bristled. "I don't want charity." "Good," Elias said, stepping away from the counter. "Then let's make a deal. You can stay here as long as you're honest with me, and you help." "Around the ranch," she frowned. "Doing what?" "Cleaning, mending, feeding the animals. If you can cook, even better. We'll figure it out." "And that's it? That's it?" Clara wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. She could hardly believe the simplicity of it. A roof, food, warmth, and no strings? "I can do that," she said cautiously, "but you should know. I've run from things, from people. There might be trouble." "I figured." Elias turned toward the barn window, watching snow drift past the glass. "You came here with fear on your heels. I've seen that look before." She didn't ask where. She was too afraid of what he'd say. Still seated on the floor, she pulled the quilt tighter around herself. "You said I had to be honest. What about you?" That made him pause. He looked over his shoulder at her. "What do you want to know?" She studied him, his lined face, the way his shirt collar hid part of the burn that crept down his neck. He looked like a man who'd seen fire and lived through it, but not without damage. "Why are you out here alone?" she asked. He gave a humorless smile. "Same reason as you, probably. Trying to survive something." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was shared. Like two people sitting on opposite sides of a river, understanding that they'd both nearly drowned in it. "I don't trust you yet," Clara said honestly. "You don't have to," Elias replied. "Just don't lie. That's all I ask." The deal hung in the air like an invisible contract. She nodded once, and so did he. Later, as Clara changed into the clean flannel shirt Elias had left folded by the hearth, she caught herself in the small mirror above the wash basin. Her face was hollow, her eyes bruised by fatigue. But for the first time in a long time, her reflection didn't look like a ghost. She had a place for now, and strangely, terrifyingly, it hadn't cost her anything she couldn't give. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm, simple, predictable, and oddly comforting. Elias rose before dawn. He made coffee, checked on the horses, and shoveled the snow away from the barn doors. Clara watched him from the loft window. Each morning, half expecting him to tell her it was time to go, He never did. He never said much at all. Clara began helping without being asked, sweeping the floors, washing dishes, boiling water to clean linens. She mended a pair of Elias's torn gloves and folded his clothes with care. When he brought in buckets of well water, she wordlessly poured them into the wash basin. At night, she lit the oil lamp, cooked what little they had: beans, cornbread, stew from dried venison, and left him the larger portion. They barely spoke beyond what was necessary. But in that silence, something strange was happening. Clara was learning to breathe again. She couldn't remember the last time she'd gone a full day without someone yelling at her, touching her, or telling her she wasn't enough. But Elias spoke softly when he spoke at all. He never raised his voice. He never touched her, not even by accident. And when he looked at her, it was with the same steady gaze he gave his horses, patient, quiet, unreadable. He didn't treat her like she was broken, which made her feel more broken than ever. On the third night, after the fire burned low and the shadows stretched long across the floor, Clara sat on the edge of the hearth while Elias cleaned a rifle at the table. The silence between them grew heavier than usual, thick with words neither of them could say. She finally broke it. "You don't ask questions." Elias glanced up. "Do you want me to?" She shrugged. "Most men, they demand answers. Who I am, where I came from, what I did." "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." Clara blinked. That answer, so calm, so steady, hit her like a blow to the chest. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready," she whispered. "That's your right." She looked over at him. "Aren't you curious?" Elias set the cloth down, his large hands resting still on the rifle. "I've seen what curiosity does. Sometimes people don't need rescuing. They just need space." That silenced her again, but not in the way that made her feel dismissed. She felt seen. Elias's restraint, his calmness, it wasn't indifference. It was a kind of respect she didn't know how to handle. She stood and moved toward the table. "You really don't care who I was?" "I care who you are now." Clara sat across from him, searching his face, half of it rough with old burn scars, the other calm and unreadable. He looked like a man carved from hardship. And yet he'd given her more peace in 3 days than she'd had in 3 years. She reached out almost without thinking and touched the worn edge of the rifle he was cleaning. "Was it the war?" she asked quietly, nodding toward his scars. Elias didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, fingers tracing the rifle's smooth barrel. "Not the war itself," he said at last. "What came after?" Clara didn't press. She understood that kind of pain. The kind that doesn't hit you when the world is burning, but when the smoke clears and you realize you're still alive. That kind. "I used to think if I kept moving, nothing could catch me," Clara said, almost to herself. "Did it help?" "No," she admitted. "Just made me tired." Elias gave a faint nod. "Sometimes standing still is harder." They sat. In the low firelight, the snowstorm outside replaced by quiet drifts and a moonlit chill. The silence returned, but this time it was softer. A truce. A fragile thread of understanding between two people still haunted by whatever they'd fled. Later, as Clara lay in the loft wrapped in her quilt, she stared at the rafters and listened to the sound of Elias's boots moving below. The man rarely spoke, but his silence wasn't empty. It was safe, and that, more than anything, terrified her, because if he was the first man she could trust, then what would happen if he ever stopped letting her stay? It was a morning like any other, gray. Light through the window, snow huddled against the cabin walls, the stove already warm from Elias's early fire. Clara moved quietly through the kitchen, barefoot, wrapped in a wool shawl. Her hands had stopped shaking in the mornings. Her face, though still pale, no longer looked like it belonged to a woman waiting for the next blow to fall. Elias had already Gone to the barn. He always left before dawn, giving her space. Or maybe giving himself some, too. She found herself humming under her breath as she set 2 plates on the table. A simple tune, nothing in particular, but it startled her. The sound of her own voice in a room that had held mostly silence. She liked the quiet now. Because it wasn't heavy anymore, it didn't press on her like before. It felt like breathing room. She reached up to take a tin plate from the cupboard shelf too quickly. Her sleeve caught the edge of the stack, and before she could react, 1 plate slipped from her fingers. It hit the floor with a harsh clang and shattered into 3 jagged pieces. Clara froze. Her breath caught in her throat, her muscles locked. A plate. She had dropped a plate. And now her hands flew up instinctively, shielding her face. Her body braced for a yell, for footsteps charging across the floor, for something, a hand, a fist, a voice calling her useless or stupid. That was always. What came next? But nothing came, just silence. Then footsteps. Slow. Calm. Elias appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a towel. He glanced from her wide, panicked eyes to the broken plate on the floor. He didn't speak right away. He just stepped forward and knelt down beside her. Still trembling, Clara slowly lowered her arms. "I'm sorry," she breathed. I didn't mean. It's just a plate," Elias said quietly. He picked up the sharp-edged pieces with his bare hands, placing them gently on the table. No anger, no accusation. Just a man cleaning up a mess that didn't matter. Clara blinked at him. Her hands were still trembling, but something else now filled her chest, something warm and painful at the same time. "You're not gonna yell." "At me?" she asked in a broken voice. Elias looked up at her. "Have I ever?" She shook her head. "Then why would I start now?" Clara sank to her knees. The breath she'd been holding released all at once in a sharp, shuddering exhale. The tears that followed came without permission, hot, sudden, and silent. She turned her face away, ashamed, but Elias didn't move. He just sat there beside her on the floor, not touching, not speaking, not pushing, letting her cry. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was the first time she'd cried in front of another soul in years. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, wiping at her cheeks. "You don't need to be. I'm not used to this, to someone being kind." "I'm not always kind," he said after a moment. "But I try not to hurt people who've already had enough." Her throat tightened. That was it. That was the part no one had ever understood before. Not the hunger, not the cold, not the wandering. It was the constant, aching exhaustion of being treated like a problem to be fixed or a burden to be thrown away. Elias stood and extended a hand. Rough and scarred. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm but careful, helping her rise to her feet as though she were made of glass. And maybe, in some ways, she was. They stood close now. Not touching, but near enough that she could feel the heat of him. She looked up at him and saw something in his eyes, not pity, not attraction, but quiet recognition, like they were both survivors of something they hadn't yet spoken aloud. He stepped back, picking up the broken plate and dropping it gently into the trash bin. "I've got an old spare." "Don't worry about it," he said, then turned back to the stove. "Breakfast'll burn if we wait too long." And just like that, it was over, but everything had shifted, because that morning, Clara had broken more than a plate. She had cracked the wall she'd built around her heart, and Elias had simply stepped through the opening without making a sound. The snow melted slowly that week. The wind softened, and the sun, though pale and fleeting, made occasional appearances over the wide, frozen prairie. It wasn't warm by any stretch, but something about the thaw felt symbolic. Inside the cabin, Clara moved with more ease. She had found her rhythm sweeping in the mornings, feeding the hens, learning to saddle a horse with Elias's quiet guidance. Her hands were red from cold water and scrub work, but she didn't mind. They were her hands now, her labor, her choice. One morning, while Elias rode into town for supplies, Clara stayed behind to clean. She didn't snoop, not at first. She respected his privacy, same as he respected hers. But while dusting the bookshelf by the fireplace, a folded piece of paper fluttered loose from between the pages of an old ledger. It landed at her feet. She bent down, meaning to just put it back. But then she saw her name written on the back. Not Clara, but Josie. Her heart skipped. She wasn't sure why she opened it. Curiosity, maybe. Or maybe it was the careful, almost grieving way her name had been written, like someone holding on and letting go at the same time. The letter was old, smudged, half-finished. But the words cut deeper than she expected. Josie, I don't know if this letter will ever reach you. I don't even know if you're alive. I wasn't there when you needed me, and that's a weight I'll carry to my grave. They told me it was an accident, that nothing could have been done. But that's a lie. I could have come sooner. I should have. I see your face every time I close my eyes. I see the fire. I smell the smoke. I hear the scream that stopped too soon. I miss you. I'm sorry. I've let her stop there. Just a scratch across the bottom like the pen had slipped, or the will to finish it had died in his hand. Clara sat on the floor, the paper trembling in her lap. Josie. She could be a sister, a daughter, a wife. Whoever she was, Elias had loved her, and something terrible had happened. Something that had scorched more than Elias's skin. The fire, the scream, the guilt. Suddenly, Elias's silence made more sense. His solitude, the way he flinched at sudden noises, the way he never asked for anything. He wasn't just hiding from people, he was punishing himself. Clara refolded the letter and carefully slid it back where it had been. She didn't mention it when Elias returned. Not that night. Not the next. But she watched him differently now. Every time he winced rubbing his shoulder, every time he avoided the fireplace's heat, every time he stepped outside just to breathe in the cold air, she saw it. Not just the scar on his skin, but the one on his soul, and it made her ache in a place she'd long thought numb. One evening, they sat together after supper. Elias was whittling a piece of wood by the fire, quiet, steady, hands moving like it was muscle memory. You ever lose someone? Clara asked softly. He didn't look up. Didn't stop carving. Yes, he said simply. I think I lost myself for a while, she said. Still not sure if I found all the pieces. Sometimes the pieces don't come back, Elias replied. You just learn to live with the gaps. She nodded. That made sense. Painful, but true. There was a long silence after that. Then she said, Who was she? He didn't ask how she knew. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. My wife, he said. Josie. Clara folded her hands in her lap. I'm sorry. He looked into the fire. She died in a house fire while I was working in the canyon. Took me hours to ride back. Too late. The crackle of the fire filled the room. Clara reached for the mug of tea in front of her, holding it between both hands like warmth could keep her from shattering. I know what it's like, she said, to carry blame that doesn't belong to you. Their eyes met across the space between them. Neither of them said more. They didn't need to, because that night the cabin wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was becoming something else. A place for ghosts to rest, a place where the past was finally being named, and a place where, just maybe, two broken people could begin to forgive themselves. The thaw didn't last. By week's end, the skies turned dark again, not with snow this time, but with trouble. Elias returned from his supply run into Hastings looking grimmer than usual. Clara noticed it the moment he stepped into the cabin. His hat, dusted with sleet, hung limp in his hand. His shoulders, always broad and steady, now looked tight with tension. He didn't say anything at first, just set the flour sack down on the counter and lit the stove. But Clara saw it all. He was listening more than usual. Watching the windows dot when she brought him a tin of coffee, he didn't take a sip right away. He just looked at her, the scar on his jaw catching the firelight. "Someone in town asked about you," he said at last. Clara froze. "Who?" "Man. In a long coat, real loud voice. Said he was looking for a runaway. Claimed you were his property." Her throat tightened. She sat slowly across from him. "What did you say?" "I said I didn't know anything." He paused, then added, "Didn't. Me too. Just the way he talked made my stomach turn." Clara stared at the fire. Her voice came out quiet, cracked. "His name's Tom Greeley." Elias nodded, like he already knew. Clara didn't want to speak at all, not again. But she owed him the truth now. He'd earned it. He's not my husband. He never was. I worked in his saloon in Fort Camden, sweeping floors, sometimes running trays. When his girl ran off, he thought I'd be easier to keep around. Started locking me in, taking what he wanted. When I said no, he said I was already his, like a horse or a piece of land. She swallowed hard. I escaped one night through the back door. Took nothing but my boots and a loaf of bread I didn't even get to keep. I've been running ever since. Elias didn't speak right away. He just sat there, listening like no man ever had before. When she finally raised her eyes, she saw his jaw clenched, his knuckles pale around the tin mug. "He's not going to take you," Elias said, quiet but sure. "You don't know him." "I don't need to." She shook her head. "He'll come. If he thinks I'm here, he'll come. Then we'll be ready." Clara blinked. No man had ever said we when her past came knocking. Elias stood and began checking the locks on the windows, the hinges on the door. He moved with the calm precision of a man who had once faced fire and decided never to be caught unprepared again. "You're not responsible for me," Clara said. "You gave me shelter, food. I can leave. Lead him away." He turned to her, eyes dark, voice low. "You're not leaving. Not because of him." Clara's heart swelled and twisted. She wanted to believe this man could keep her safe. But she also knew men like Tom Greeley. They didn't give up. They didn't forgive. And they didn't forget. What if he burns the place down? She asked, eyes glancing to the wooden walls, to the barn beyond the window. Elias's voice was iron. "Then we rebuild." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, believed that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to run anymore. But later that night, as she lay in the loft, listening to the creak of Elias's boots pacing downstairs, Clara couldn't stop the thoughts circling in her mind. She'd brought danger to his doorstep. She was the storm now. And Elias had already lost too much to fire. She didn't want to be the reason he lost again. The next morning dawned pale and cold, with a wind that whispered like it was carrying someone's name. Clara stood at the edge of the pasture, Elias's old coat wrapped around her shoulders, her fingers curled around a steaming cup of coffee. She stared at the horizon, the one place she never let herself look too long. Out there was freedom or danger. Sometimes both came dressed the same. Elias joined her without a word. He stood beside her, arms folded, scanning the same stretch of empty land. After a minute, he spoke. "There's a train out of Hastings. Tomorrow morning. I bought you a ticket." Clara turned to him sharply. "You want me to leave?" "No," he said plainly. "But I figured you might want the choice." Her breath hitched. She lowered her eyes, watching the steam rise from her cup. "You think I'll bring trouble?" "I know trouble's coming," Elias said gently. "And I know the way that man talked about you. Like you were something he lost, not someone who got away." Clara looked at him, voice raw. "And what if I don't want to run anymore?" Elias met her gaze. "Then you stay." That was it. No pleading, no persuasion. Just permission wrapped in calm certainty. She didn't answer right away. She turned. Back to the fields. The wind pulled at her hair. She thought about what running meant. New towns, fake names, cold stares from women who knew but said nothing. The constant fear of a boot behind her in the dark, and she thought about here. The smell of the hearth at night. The way Elias left coffee for her every morning. How his silence didn't feel like distance, but space to breathe. She was tired. Of running, but staying. Staying meant risking more than her safety. It meant risking her heart. That night, she didn't sleep in the loft. She came down the ladder after Elias had banked the fire and was putting away the tools. He looked up, surprised but not startled. She sat at the table, hands folded. I want to stay. Elias pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, quiet. You sure? I'm sure. I can't guarantee it'll be easy. I don't need easy, Clara said. I just need real. A long pause passed between them, filled with the low creak of the cabin's bones and the wind pressing at the windows. You're not the first person who tried to save me, she said, voice barely above a whisper. But you're the first one who didn't ask for anything back. Elias looked at her then, eyes soft. That's because I'm not trying to save you. I just don't want you to go through this alone. Clara felt tears burn her eyes. But she blinked them away. She'd cried enough already. She was done breaking. She reached across the table, hesitantly, and Elias didn't flinch when her fingers touched his. They just sat like that, hands barely touching, calloused palms and worn skin. Two people weathered by life but still standing. That night, Elias set a rifle by the door and slept in the chair facing the window. Clara didn't ask him to, and he didn't ask her why she was crying quietly upstairs as the moon rose, but they both knew, because for the first time in years, Clara wasn't crying out of fear. She was crying because she'd finally chosen to stay. It happened just after midday. The snow had melted enough to turn the dirt path muddy, and the horses were restless in the corral. Clara was gathering eggs. Behind the cabin when she heard it, hoofs, heavy, pounding, slow, not like Elias's horse, not like anyone local. She stood still, the basket trembling in her hands. The sound grew louder, closer, each beat thudding in her chest like a warning bell. She looked toward the road. And saw him, Tom Greeley, hat low, coat black as night, sitting atop a chestnut stallion that snorted steam into the winter air. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just stared at her like he'd been waiting years to do it. Clara backed toward the cabin. Fast. The door flew open before she reached it. Elias. He stepped out with his rifle already in hand. Calm, steady, unreadable, but she saw the storm. In his eyes. Tom dismounted. His boots squelched in the mud. He took 2 slow steps forward and said, loud enough to be heard through the trees, "That woman belongs to me." Elias's voice came hard and level. "Not anymore," Tom smirked. "She ran, took what wasn't hers. That makes her a thief." "I don't see a thief," Elias said. "I see a guest. One under my protection." Tom laughed short and ugly. "What is this, then? You hiding her out here like some backwoods knight?" Elias didn't flinch. "Leave. Now." Tom took another step. His coat shifted, and Clara saw the pistol at his hip. "Or what?" Tom sneered. "You gonna shoot? And me, burn boy?" In a blink, Elias raised the rifle and cocked it. The click echoed like thunder across the field. Clara stepped beside him. Before she even realized she'd moved. "I'm not going back with you," she said, her voice shaking but loud. "Not ever." Tom's eyes narrowed. "I'll have the law after you." "Try," Elias replied. "Judge Tillman's a friend, so's the sheriff. And they know I don't bluff." Something in Tom's posture changed, just enough to see the crack in his bravado. He hadn't expected resistance. He hadn't expected her to speak, but then his hand twitched. Clara saw the way his fingers dropped low toward his belt. "Gun!" she screamed. Elias fired first. The shot cracked through the cold, echoing down the valley like a warning to anyone listening. Tom went down shoulder hit, gun falling to the mud. Clara stood frozen, not in fear, but in awe. Elias walked to Tom slowly, rifle still raised. Tom clutched his shoulder, cursing through his teeth. "You'll bleed, but you'll live," Elias said. "If I see you again, that won't be true." Clara came up behind him, face pale but jaw firm. "She doesn't belong to anyone," Elias added, "and she never did." Tom stared at Clara, something ugly and helpless in his expression now. She met his eyes and didn't blink. Then Elias turned and walked away, rifle still in hand. Clara followed him back to the porch. They didn't speak until they heard the sound of Tom's horse retreating down the road, hoof beats growing smaller, fainter, and finally gone. Clara sat down hard on the porch steps. Her breath came quick, shallow. Elias sat beside her. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "You didn't hesitate." "Wouldn't be much of a man if I did." She looked at him, then really looked. The lines in his face, the quiet strength in his voice, the steadiness in his hands, and the scar curling down his neck like a map of everything he'd survived. "You didn't just protect me," she whispered. "You believed me." Elias didn't respond with words. He just reached over and gently laid his hand over hers, warm, real, grounding. It wasn't just the danger that had passed. It was something deeper, something that had been chasing her long before Tom Greeley ever found her. That day, Elias didn't just send a man away. He gave Clara her name back, her voice, her future. The air felt thinner after Tom rode away, like the land itself had exhaled. But peace never lingered long in places where pain once lived. 3 nights later, the smell of smoke woke Clara from the loft, thick, acidic, too close. She bolted upright. Below, through the floorboards, she saw a flickering orange light. Not from the hearth. From the barn. She ran to the window, heart in her throat. The barn, standing proud and weathered just days ago, was ablaze, flames licking skyward, devouring. The roof, screams of terrified horses pierced the night. "Elias!" she shouted, scrambling down the ladder. He was already at the door, rifle slung across his back, buckets in hand. "No hesitation. Stay inside." He barked, but she didn't. "Listen." The fire roared louder now, fueled by dry hay and wind. Elias kicked the barn doors open, smoke billowing out like a living creature. Without a word, he vanished inside. "Elias!" Clara screamed. She grabbed another bucket, filled it at the trough, and ran after him. Inside was chaos, fire crawling across the beams, horses kicking and screaming, Elias trying to lead them out one by one. His face was blackened with soot, his shirt torn from where sparks had caught. Clara coughed hard, eyes watering, but she found the nearest stall latch and pulled. "Go!" she shouted, slapping the flank of a panicked Mare. The horse bolted into the night, safe. Together, she and Elias freed the others, working in wordless rhythm through the smoke. Buckets did little. Flames leapt higher. Then a loud crack split. The air. A beam came crashing down. Elias shoved Clara back just in time, but not fast enough. The burning wood clipped his shoulder, sending him to the ground. Clara dropped beside him, screaming his name. He coughed. Eyes open. "I'm fine." He rasped, voice hoarse. "No, you're not," she snapped, gripping under his arms. "Come on." She dragged him out, step by agonizing step, through the smoke, through the mud, through the blaze. When they finally stumbled into the snow, the barn behind them fully collapsed in a shower of sparks. They fell together into the cold, Panting, Clara cradled his head in her lap, checking his pulse, brushing soot from his face. "You stupid man," she cried. "You should have let me help sooner." He looked up at her, eyes full of quiet pain. "You did help. You always do." His shoulder was burned. His chest heaved with every breath. But he was alive. The barn was gone. Tools, feed, the hay they'd stocked, gone. But the horses were safe, and Elias was still breathing. The next morning, Clara sat beside his bed in the cabin, wiping a cool cloth across his brow. He drifted in and out of sleep, murmuring sometimes about the fire, about Josie, about the night he hadn't been able to save the woman he'd loved. But now, he had. He'd saved Clara Dot, and in a way, she'd saved him too. Later that afternoon, he stirred and looked at her with full awareness. "Was it Greeley?" he asked. Clara nodded. "He came back in the dark. Must have torched it and ran." Elias didn't say anything. His jaw clenched, but not in fear and grief. Anger, resolve. Clara leaned forward. "You took the barn, but that's all. We still have the land. We still have the cabin, and we have each other." He looked at her for a long time, then reached up slowly and touched her cheek. "You're not running anymore, are you?" "No," she whispered. "Not from this, not from you." His hand fell back to the blanket, exhausted. But his eyes stayed locked on hers. They'd survived the fire. Together, and what was left was something worth rebuilding. Spring came slowly to the prairie. The snow melted in long, quiet days. The wind lost its bite. The land, stubborn as Elias himself, softened under the sun, and the cabin stood scarred but solid, like its owners. The barn was gone, but not forgotten. In its place stood a pile of fresh-cut beams, rough lumber hauled in from town, stacked neatly beside a wagon Clara helped attach herself. Rebuilding wasn't just a task now, it was a promise. One they made. To each other without saying a word. Elias had recovered slowly. His shoulder ached in the mornings, and some nights the pain pulled him from sleep. But Clara was there, cool cloth in hand, voice soft in the dark, steady as the ground beneath him. And when the pain was too much, her fingers laced through. His like a rope pulling him back to shore. He called her his anchor. She never said it aloud, but he had become her home. One evening, with the stars spilling over the sky like salt, Elias stood on the porch and watched Clara work in the garden they'd planted near the side of the cabin. Her sleeves were rolled, her brow damp with sweat, her hands deep in the soil. She looked like she belonged there. She looked happy. "Funny thing," he said as she approached, wiping her hands. "This place was always just mine, quiet, empty. Now it feels alive." She smiled. "You think that's me?" He nodded. "I know it is." She leaned into his side. He slipped an arm around her, careful of his shoulder. They stood like that for a while, the sun dipping low, the land golden and open before them. "I never thought I'd stop running," Clara said quietly. "I never thought I'd want someone to stay." Clara turned to him, her voice soft but steady. "You gave me more than shelter, Elias. You gave me the space to become. Not what anyone else wanted, just me." He touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the edge of her jaw. "You saved yourself." "Clara, I just opened the door." She leaned into his touch. "Then keep it open. For good." Elias swallowed hard. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." That night, under a sky so wide it made her feel small and whole at the same time, Elias laid a small wooden box in her hands. Inside wasn't a ring. He wasn't a man for jewelry. Inside was a key. To the cabin. To the lime. To the life aid. "Fought for. This is yours now," he said. "Ours if you'll have it." Clara laughed, choked up and shining. "I never thought I'd say yes to a future." "Then say it now." She did, and in that small, quiet cabin built by a man who'd lost everything, and saved by a woman who'd survived more than most could bear. New life took root. One made not of grand gestures or easy roads, but of rebuilt barns. Of shared morning coffee. Of sitting side by side through pain and peace, of two scarred hearts choosing to stay again and again together.